Good morning and welcome back to Good Morning Tobago. Right here on Tobago Updates this morning, we are continuing our post-election discussions, and I'm sitting in studio and having a chat with former Assemblyman and former Minority Leader Ashworth. Now, we've heard the question over and over again. How come Tobago didn't get any senators, and why haven't they negotiated any senators? And we heard from the deputy political leader, Dr. Faith B. Israel, coming out and saying, well, again, our main focus is autonomy. We're not joining the cabinet. We have said it time and time again that we are not UNC. We are independent of that organization. However, one of the main arguments that she had put forward is that this administration does not want to take collective responsibility for the decisions made by the UNC. Do you think that's a reasonable position to take as it pertains to not having members in the cabinet?
I think that one of the things that was clear throughout the entire campaign was that the TPP was saying, we are an independent organization and we don't want to be linked to any organization. It doesn't mean that you don't have good relationship, but you're not formally linked to any organization. Accepting members of the Senate means that you are a member of the government, right? And therefore, everything you're linked. And then there's a historical antecedent that says the biggest argument that the PNM have advanced in the last 12 to 13 years is the issue of any organization that is in Tobago that is not PNM, you're linked to the UNC. And as I said on numerous occasions, I want to repeat it. It has nothing to do with a party. It is really a pseudo-racist statement that you're making. And I know that there are so many people who are afraid of the consequence and political consequence in this case of having some of those relationships. I remember one station, someone asked me when they do you still have a good relationship with Mrs. Prasad Bisses? And I asked him, I said, what will stop that? Because you don't think I should have one? And so the idea that on every platform, every night, the leadership of the TPP was saying, we will negotiate with whoever is there and we'll do this and that. It would have been really disingenuous. So a couple of years after, when none of the parties don't need your vote to form a government. If it was that there was a crisis where somebody needs your vote to form government, then you have to choose which of the parties you want to do. But as it is, they don't need your vote to form a government. So you don't have to become a power broker in terms of alleviating any crisis. And so this calls for a different kind of skill. This call for respect. This call for, on both sides, a call for respect, and it calls for you to be able to understand what you bring to the table. Because in the last, 10 years, the government have governed without making one majority decision, a special majority decision, because they didn't have it. In this case, there is one special majority decision could be made. But there's also a situation where everybody's saying we want to give Tobago autonomy. And therefore the Chief Secretary have to be skillful enough to navigate both sets of leaders to get the issue of Tobago's autonomy dealt with. If you're hard and fast on one side, it means that you say you're government to your opposition. And if you have an opposition leader, like we have had a number of opposition leaders in the past, once you're not for me, you're against me, it makes it a lot more difficult to be able to get that. But I think Tobago needs to be in a position where it negotiates, especially this autonomy bill, and then people will stop asking the question about the ministers and stuff like that, because they realize they really don't have any power in the Tobago space. That being said, I am also one of the advocates that the Constitution must be amended to give Tobago senator as of right. It must not be dependent on which party is in power in Trinidad. Tobago must have at least 2 or so senators as of right, because there are 2 houses, and the upper house also have to pass money bills, it have to pass all the other bills, and therefore Tobago must have a say in where these things go as of right, because you must not have to toe a party line necessarily, because you're more than likely, if you're majority, you'll toe the majority line. If you're minority, you toe the minority line. If it is as it is now in Tobago, where you have a separate organization altogether, then you more than likely what you'll do is toe the Tobago line and not necessarily any of the parties in Trinidad.
Right.
So a senator as of right have to be something we need
To advocate for.
in Tobago.
Right. And even as it pertains to the airport, Tobago having greater control over the economic activity that happens at that airport in Tobago, what are some of your perspectives on that?
Tobago should have the greatest degree of control over anything that happens in the Tobago space, inclusive of security. You have to understand that Trinidad and Tobago might be one country, but the cultures are different. And once you have different cultures, there need to be an understanding of that culture in order to be able to govern. Government is about looking at the cultures of people and making laws, making policies and stuff that is in tandem with the culture. And if the culture have to shake, you have to do it gradually, where you bring people on board. But when you have a situation where people are totally divorced of the cultures in another space, then they are going to make decisions that are going to be disruptive. And we have seen that time and time again. And then there's another thing that people have to realize. Sometimes having somebody who is born in Tobago and live away for a long time doesn't mean that they still anchor with the culture. And so we have to look at how culture affects policy and how culture affects law.
Right. And even as it pertains to the inclusion of the Tobago House of Assembly, as it pertains to making recommendations for those state boards and state enterprises, before we saw a situation where the central government, if they pleased, would have put a Tobago representative, but not necessarily a representative that represented the Tobago House of Assembly.
Vis-a-vis the TG.
Right? Do you see moving forward that would be a place for improvement, or where collaboration would take place to ensure that
I think it has
the
to be.
THA is represented on these state
It has
enterprises?
to be, because there are some things housing is a case in point, planning is a case in point, the airport authority, the port authority, those things directly impact upon the operational readiness of Tobago for disasters, even for our everyday living. And the organization charged with the responsibility of developing Tobago and managing Tobago is the Tobago House of Assembly. And therefore, if you're going to have members on these boards, and I find it's time enough that we also look at quotas. Because having a token Tobagonian on some of these boards really doesn't do justice. If you have a 10-member or 11-member board on the airport of Trinidad and Tobago, Airport Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, you have 2 airports. And therefore, Tobago must have more than a token representative. Right? The same thing applies to the port. I mean, there are more ports than 2, but at the same time, what those boards govern are very mainly 2 main ports of Scarborough and Port of Spain. And therefore, things like those, I think need to be renegotiated. I know when a government wins power in Trinidad, there are a million people lining up, waiting to get something in terms of their membership, and these boards are sometimes used to give experience to prospective managers, maybe even prospective politicians. But Tobago must be treated as an equal partner in all of these things. And that's been said. I just want to say this to all the Tobagonians that have been calling my phone, asking about if I can get a board appointment for you. I'm not a member of the Tobago House of Assembly. I'm not a member of the Tobago House of Assembly. You know, I have some relationships, but in the last couple of days, it has been horrible. It has been horrible. Everybody wants a board appointment. talk to the chief secretary.
Understood. Well, we're going to take a quick break right here and we'll be back right after this. See you soon. Good morning and welcome back to Good Morning Tobago right here on Tobago Updates. Now we have been discussing all matters Tobago and all post-election discussions here on Tobago Updates. This morning I've been chatting with Ashworth Jack, former assemblyman and former minority leader in the THA. We have discussed the results of that last election for a number of persons. They were not expecting such a wipeout, as some persons call it, of the People's National Movement, not just here in Tobago, but on a national level. And, you know, even during the campaign season in Tobago particularly, we heard a lot of discussions from the People's National Movement side about the competence and the experience of the two Tobago representatives that were chosen, but they ended up coming out victorious, although they didn't have as much experience as the incumbents. What are your views on that, and do you think this is indicative of a different approach that the People's National Movement needs to take?
I think I'll start from the last question and go forward. It is interesting that as soon as somebody have experience, they start to say you don't have any. There are no MPs except if you served in another body like the Tobago House of Assembly and stuff like that, that will go into the parliament with experience. And you can't say that of Joel. Joel surely was a member of the Tobago House of Assembly for 3 years. He was assistant secretary and was promoted to secretary. He also was the deputy presiding officer. So to say Joel doesn't have any experience really was not a true statement. But even if he did not have experience, none of the two people who were saying he didn't have experience had experience when they first went into. Mrs. Kojulo was a senator for a while, but when she became a senator, she didn't have any experience.
Right, but Mr. Jack, we have a caller on the line joining in on the discussion. Good morning and welcome.
Take English school. I am Tobagonian, but I do not live in Trinidad. I do not live in Tobago. But I wanted to raise with Mr. Jack the issue that he has just raised with respect to the appointment of board members to boards and so on. And one of the phrases that caught my attention was he said that so many people wish and have called for to be appointed to boards. I take issue with this in the sense that appointment to a board ought to be based on the ability of what does a board member do? A board member contributes to the desirable outcomes for which the board has been mandate, and therefore it ought not to be based on loyalty or whatever, but rather it should be based solely on the individual's ability to contribute to what is perceived as the responsibilities of the board and the outcomes that are desired. Thank you very much. I would like to have
you raise that, because I have seen, I don't know if there's a school of thought that says all the loyalty resides in one organization, because every organization, based on the numbers, will have loyalty in both places. But you also have to understand that board members are the persons who drive the policy of an organization. And therefore, if you have board members that are at odds with the stated policy of the cabinet and the minister in particular, you will be marking time. You will not get much done. And what I'm saying is that there might be situations where there are persons who might not be of the same school of thought with you, and you might have some of those. But why would you set up a board to fight each other based on policy? And I just said that you disagree with people calling, and I'm saying I just said I did. But the issue of competence is always paramount. But I have seen, now that the boards are resigning, I've seen some of the people on some of those boards. I don't know if they fit in. And that might be my opinion. And that's the other thing. Sometimes we judge people without hearing and seeing their contributions. And so I don't judge people based on that. I wait until I see the outcome of their contributions. And then it is in that regard that I would judge if the board was competent or not.
Excellent. Caller, are you still there?
I think we can go back to
I
this.
think we would have lost that caller, but that's interesting because for a number of years, and the culture of politics has seen board appointments as being a reward for political loyalty, and I think that what a number of persons want to see is a greater level of not just competence, but in some cases a bit of transparency as it pertains to that, or maybe even as the board probably has 10 positions, even if there are 2 positions that persons can apply to, to be a part of that speaks to a
Then we have
certain
to change
level
the constitution.
of elevation,
We need to
right?
change the constitution
And
because,
a greater level of inclusion.
as I said to the caller, if you have a board, for example, I think 300 and something thousand people voted for the UNC, 200 and something thousand people voted for the PNM. And I'm quite sure you can find people within that 300 and something thousand people that you wouldn't have to fight with in a board meeting. Because it doesn't mean that everything oil and gas reside in one party or everything housing reside in one party. There will be that. I know that there are going to be times that people think that everybody should be involved, but is it that everybody wants to be involved on the same page? Is it that the people who might belong to a different organization will divorce themselves of the organization and say, look, what we come here to do is to fix the board business? If that is so, then it's easy. But if you come with your prejudice, that has nothing to do with the working of the board, then there's another situation. But I know right here in Tobago, there are members of other political organizations on boards here in Tobago. So this is not something that is not practiced. It is practiced, but if we want to legislate it, is a different story altogether. But I have seen people right here in Tobago that was walking in red before the THA election and are on boards in Tobago. So it's not anything unique.
Understood. As it pertains to that relationship moving forward, persons are looking forward to just overall better functioning for the Tobago House of Assembly. They're looking forward to greater allocations. They're looking forward to the THA being able to really fulfill a number of its mandates. But again, in the news item this morning, we heard from Dr. Winford James saying, and the only thing that would allow for this type of progress is that allegiance, that strategic allegiance
in
with
the
the
absence of legislation, relationships will have to take over. And I'm saying, yes, it is okay to depend on relationship, but it must not be something that goes in indefinitely. Right? For now, it has to be relationships. And we were expected that the relationships would have been better, maybe not in the last 3 years, but prior to the last 3 years, there was a PNM in Trinidad and PNM in Tobago. But we still saw an erosion of the Tobago House of Assembly responsibility. So to depend solely on relationship is not a good idea, and not to me. And I'm saying, yes, relationship will help in the initial stages, but there must be legislation that says, regardless of who is in Trinidad and who is in Tobago, these things are the right of Tobagonian. What happens if that relationship breaks down by another organization being in power in either of the islands? Then what have happened in the last couple of years where even the seating of members of the executive of the Tobago House Assembly was so poor, even the way they were addressed, the salutations, you Farley, that kind of stuff, to the chief secretary in an official function. Those things will continue to happen because there are conflicts. Everybody trying to make room for themselves to show that they are the biggest, baddest wolf, and then therefore playing to their membership. And I just want to say this. I remember.
Just now, Mr. Jack, I think we have a caller on the line. Caller, good morning.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, good morning, caller.
Well, I have a question for Mr. Jack.
Please go ahead.
And my question is, how can we study back contribution to the Tobago economy?
Okay. That's a good question, but unfortunately for me, you've asked me a question that I've been speaking to for the last 2 years. Study Park, the biggest problem with Study Park right now, why it is not making a greater contribution to the Tobago economy, was the ban on export of aggregate. Tobago was denied an aggregate license. And therefore, we are very, very hopeful that that will be lifted. But I want to caution people that the day the ban is lifted will not be the day we are able to export. The lifting of the ban, what it will do, it will give us the ability to borrow the money that is necessary to replace two very aged plants, especially the Nordberg, which is the older of the plants. And I had to explain to another closed door meeting a couple of days ago, I think the day before yesterday, that one of the drawbacks about some of those plants is that the plant is so aged that some of the plants have to be made for us. So it takes a long time to be done. We have been out looking for plants. We have been out looking for loans. We are actually right on the verge.
Oh, no,
and so we are on the verge of being able to get the loan. And that is, as I said, quite dependent. Our ability to pay back that loan is quite dependent on the ability to export material, because Tobago and even Trinidad doesn't have the need for the kind of materials that Study Park could and would produce. So once that is done, and we hope that to be done very soon, it will take us another 5 or 6 months to be able to purchase and to install the plants, so that we'll be able to produce it at a stage where we're able to have large exports.
All right. Caller, are you still there?
Yes, I'm still there.
All right. I hope that will.
Do you have any follow-up questions, sir?
Answer your question.
Well, my next question is the prospect of the contribution, not necessarily at this time, but within a year or 2 years.
What are you trying to give you some figures?
Huh? No. What I'm saying, I'm looking what can be the contribution, not just to say, well. And
then you're asking for figures.
Yeah.
Then you're asking for figures.
What percentage?
No, can Study Park be of that great importance to our economy?
Study Park is a rock quarry. It will do what it can do, but we have to understand that Study Park cannot be the be it and end it all of the Tobago economic drive. We are going to also go downstream, and I want to temper people's expectation, because if people think that Study Park is going to give you hundreds of millions of dollars every year, it's a quarry, and when you blow down the rock, when it finishes, it finishes.
The perspective of the time of Study Park is not going to be 10 years or 20 years. It's 50, 60 years.
Cecil, what is the acreage at Study Park?
What is what?
What is the acreage? And what is the expected yield on a daily or on? You see, sometimes. Hold on, Corey. I can't ask the question and answer it.
Okay. I'm listening.
The thing here has to be is what is the prospective production level? Let's say for the next year, 2 years. We are in a good position to say, because every year we have to do the topographical surveys to tell you how much material is remaining in that site. Yes, Tobago have material that could last us for probably the next 15 or 20 years, as you say, but not necessarily at that one site. There are other sites that we are exploring that we will also have to bring on stream in order to give that kind of longevity. Again, we have to take into consideration as to what are the demands in the next 15 to 20 years. The demands now is extremely great because we have Guyana coming on stream. We expect St. Vincent also doing some orders and some other places. But like everything else, it's not like oil and gas where you need the car to run. And even oil and gas, there will be a reduction in the demand based on what is happening now, where you see a number of natural materials other than oil and gas is being used to power generation, the solar to power your lights and stuff like that. Charge cars instead of putting gas. So yes, they are going to be, and that's what you have to beat the iron while it's hot. Now that the iron is hot, we have to be able to maximize on on Study Park, so that if the demand wanes in a couple of years, we would have been able to diversify the product in such a way, maybe into to brick and stuff like that, so that you don't have to depend strictly. And I am one of the people who don't believe we must depend strictly on the sale of raw material, because we can add value.
Excellent. Well, we want to thank you so much for engaging with us this morning, caller, and asking that question. Unfortunately, we are out of time this morning, so we will not be able to take any more calls. However, we want to thank you so much, Mr. Jack, for your time this morning and for being able to offer your perspectives in answering some of those questions, and as it pertains to that post-election result and the relationship moving forward between the Tobago House of Assembly and the central government while we await that Tobago autonomy. Is there anything that you want to
It is always a pleasure to be able to share what little knowledge and information that I can. I think one of the things that I have noticed in the last couple of years going around Tobago is that there's too much emotion involved and not enough information. And I'm hoping that some of the agencies in whether it be under the THA or one of the civil agencies will kind of create a situation where a lot more information is shared without the emotion of the politics, so that people come out of this in a better position. Even our young school children and our citizens who are now coming up, so that pride and that understanding of where we are and why we are where we are is shared among not only the people of Tobago, but wherever we go. So I am hoping that we get there, and I want to thank Tobago Update for doing whatever little they can in terms of sharing information.
All right. Excellent. Well, thank you so much. And guys, we want to thank you for being a part of the discussions this morning. Thank you for your likes, your shares, and your comments, and all that you have been doing and continue to do to make Tobago Updates the #1 broadcaster here on the island of Tobago. Again, I am Shenell Felix, and have a great day.